In recent weeks, the Wall Street Journal has ran a couple of articles on the UAP subject, in which they're effectively trying to debunk, I would say, the effort by many people in recent years to work for UAP disclosure. And what's interesting about this article is that it seems to rely primarily on the testimony of Sean Kirkpatrick, formerly the head of the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which was created to study the subject by Congress, and which had previously put out a report that was certainly less than inspiring. And it uses his information to try to pretty much shoot holes in everything and to give the impression that what has come out by a variety of people, such as particularly Lou Elizondo and David Grush, I think particularly, and others, as kind of is suspect and therefore should be ignored. And of course, there's a lot suspect about Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick in this too. First of all, the article itself basically admits that Sean Kirkpatrick was not very objective about the subject that he was studying. I mean, I would point out that it was kind of like, why does it have to be me? Um, when he got the call from a senior Pentagon official saying that he was the man to do the job. Apparently, he was also near retirement, so it was kind of a good swan song job for him before he went off into a private industry. So, at any rate, and so the article, an attempt to debunk, um, raises a bunch of issues, and some of which I think are most interesting. One of the ones that's probably the most objectionable about the whole thing is the comments that they had about a legendary UFO event at Malmstrom Air Force Base in which a flight of Minutemen missiles were apparently knocked offline when a UFO appeared above the launch control center, and basically, much to the shock of the security team that's on the surface. I mean, the way these things are constructed is, if you don't know why they have a support team on the surface consisting of security guards and I guess people also to prepare meals and that, whatever, that kind of thing, up above, and then below you have two launch officers in a facility below ground that's hardened, who actually would carry out the instructions of the commander in chief in the event that they ever came to actually launching the missiles. So at any rate, they have to maintain these missiles and monitor their status to see if they're operationally ready and deal with anything that comes up in peacetime, which is more like a lot of routine stuff. And they do test drills and okay. Okay. Point I'm making is that this time Lieutenant Salas, who was one of the people there, reported this object reported by the security chief on the surface, and they were quite alarmed with the whole thing. And then the missiles all went offline. Their guidance systems basically shut down, so they couldn't be launched. They had an entire flight offline, and they're trying in this article to present the idea that, well, there was a test because of the threat of electromagnetic pulse, which of course is a real issue, and that somehow this test device, which is quite large, had somehow been brought up surreptitiously and had knocked these missiles offline. And somehow, because this thing could theoretically could create an optical effect, which really wouldn't be like what was described, but nonetheless, it could be something that might be okay. But what's wrong with this is it turns out that this electromagnetic test device that's being referenced here hadn't even been proposed at the time in early 1967 when this event actually occurred. And so it couldn't have been the explanation. In fact, that this device was created in the 1970s and was used at a test lab, to test the effects, but not, it wasn't ever done on an operational a Minuteman flight online there with active nuclear warheads. In fact, it is an interesting question. Would you really want to do this with real nuclear warheads, not knowing what the effect might be on them as well? Although that may be overstated by certain people in the subject. Cold Heart makes a big point of that, but I don't think you would do it with a live nuclear warhead on an operational unit. And in fact, it wasn't because this program hadn't been proposed at that time. So, so in other words, this article itself has put out a clearly false thing, and in fact, uh, uh, people in the disclosure movement that are being criticized here have pointed this out to the editors of Wall Street Journal, and they've not made any correction or positively responded to these facts that have been put forward. It goes on in many other ways. Another thing it raises, which at any rate, an interesting case, is that there was a hazing program in the Air Force along some line. They call it a hazing program. Okay. By the way, if you like these videos, please give me a like, subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Also, you can follow me on Rumble if you get a hold of this from some other source, and you happen to be a follower of Rumble. Yeah, the idea here is that somehow there was a hazing program where various people were called in and given a briefing on a UFO reverse engineering program, which was completely fictitious, and were basically told things along the lines of, if you ever reveal this, you not only will be subjected to normal criminal prosecution, you might actually be killed, as if we actually kill our service people. I mean, spies have committed, actual treason, if you will, are rarely ever getting the death penalty, save maybe the the atomic spies, the Rosenbergs, for example. But that was years ago when death penalties were more common. Usually they get life in prison or 30 years in prison or something like that. Maybe in a not too nice environment, but nonetheless, that's what usually happens. Well, anyhow, apparently, this was a completely fictitious program, which they gave the rather bogus code name Yankee Blue, which is kind of interesting because, of course, that reminds us of Yankee White, the security level of the White House around the presidential security. It's also interesting that there's an individual who you know that was in the Air Force OSI and they retired, actually used the term Yankee Black for something that he made. And you can almost tell in the video is in that was a kind of a bogus thing, just an expression like he made it. At any rate, these people are apparently so petrified of it, according to Fitzpatrick, that they were very reluctant even to admit it to Arrow after they've been cleared to disclose this information to them, and they attribute that this belief that there were these kind of programs in the government to this hazing thing. I don't even know whether it's real or not. There is. It wasn't included in the actual official report, and they claim that it hadn't been fully investigated yet. They also claim that in 2023 that the Defense Department put out a rule to cease and desist with anything of this sort. I don't. At this point, I'm not sure whether that was real or not. But even if it is, I'm not sure what the purpose was to try to convince people, the Soviets or the Russians or the Chinese, that there is a reverse engineering program or not. We'll leave that for what it is. I don't think any of the actual ones that have been brought up in the disclosure effort are really too related to that. He also, the article brings up some other kind of non sequiturs. Of course, the Go Fast video they try to explain as a parallax issue. That's been out in the public from the debunkers for some time, and um, maybe that one is, maybe it isn't. Interesting enough that the other two videos, the Tic Tac and the what's the other one called? Anyway, the other two weren't explained away, of course, and you get similar kinds of things of this sort. Another thing that they throw out that's kind of is that Lou Elizondo claimed that some information that he had accumulated apparently was in I suppose a some sort of a magnetic storage device that was in a safe. And when they investigated the safe, it was empty, and therefore it's sort of this was supposed to debunk Lou Elizondo, except for one thing. Of course, when Lou Elizondo resigned and went public and joined to the Stars Academy and started talking about this issue, if in fact there is a program, which I believe there is, to actually study these objects and so forth, that there is a program, you would expect that the program would of course check out anything that he might have left behind, right? And there's also a whole bunch of other files he had that apparently are missing also. And some of those were under court subpoena to be preserved because they involved a case involving the Gitmo and the detainees down there, which he was involved in the, I guess, interrogation of as part of his well-known job, if not his UFO-related work he did while in the Pentagon. So that that's a, I think it, I don't I think that's really explained away that the people in the program got to it before the investigators from the FBI and the OSI got to it. In fact, maybe another branch of the OSI might have got to it. I don't know, but who knows? But at any rate, the data was not there in the safe, and so okay, ignore him. They go on with similar things. There's a lot of talk about this arts parts thing, which is a piece of material um, which had been touted for years, going through a variety of people. And again, there's a little bit of confusion about what exactly they're talking about because Chris Mellon had put out a response to this in which he points out that what they're referring to, that is to say that Dr. Eric Davis, who's another one of the people that came forward, was referring to, is not the same thing they're referring to. And so that's a little bit unclear. As I understand, the one that I'm aware of and had been discussed wasn't as prosaic as they maintain because it was made of a weird mixture of bismuth and excuse me, it was and magnesium, which would be fairly hard to put together supposedly. In their investigation of aerospace companies, Lockheed Martin admitted that they had worked on an attempt to reverse engineer something, and so that was the one thing that was real. And they said, well, but it also, from the other side, they claimed that in fact they'd failed to duplicate the piece that of alleged alien material or whatever anomalous material that they had. So that I think that is really still in contention. So we have I think this is a clear effort. I think at just debunking, but try to get people to move on and quit studying the subject and hope to deter any more congressional investigations rather than to proceed with them. Now, finally, I'd like to point out here a couple of things here. First of all, there's a little history about Dr. Fitzpatrick that has to be understood. He had denied any previous interest or involvement in this subject of the UAP. However, he did attend a presentation on Skinwalker Ranch, which is another thing that they discussed there, and maybe in a negative light. But in fact, he did attend that presentation and denied it. And then, of course, Brandon Fugel, who runs the owns Skinwalker Ranch and is involved in this, released a picture in which he's clearly at the meeting, and on the slide presentation on the screen it says Skinwalker Ranch. So obviously, either he has a bad memory or maybe he's hiding something. And also, the final thing, we can't prove this, but it's a guesstimate. If there is such a program that's concealing this information, and they found out Congress had set up a group like Arrow, don't you think they would endeavor to put somebody that's on their side as the charge of that group in order to make sure that it doesn't uh, come to a conclusion that hey, this stuff is real? And I just think that seems to be fairly logical. And finally, so that's kind of where you are on this situation. I guess my conclusion is that this is a pure debunking effort just to try to dissuade people from paying attention to it without being too honest about it. And there's clearly flaws and misstatements in what they're doing too, as has there been in the past. I mean, remember, they tried to explain away Roswell not only as a balloon, but they also tried to explain the bodies as test dummies that were dropped years later. Similarly, this is a test device that was developed years later. So, as reference to the Maelstrom case. So, anyway, that's kind of what I think about that. I think we can kind of not not give up on the UAP subject at all, based on these Wall Street Journal articles, and they've apparently been hoodwinked, apparently, or deliberately supporting the idea of keeping things on the down low, so to speak, on this subject. So I'll wrap this up for now and post this on YouTube and Rumble as always, and of course the address of my social media accounts are in the description below. So all for